Brasco, the movie. He didn't like this guy. He used to say to all the time, there's a guy hanging around. And I met, I can't even think of his name right now. What was his name? Johnny Brasco's real name.
Joe Pistone.
Joe Pistone. And my father used to say, no racket guy has a mustache. Who are they kidding?
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Loomis Show. Hit that subscribe button if it's your first time here. And we have a real special guest. I just got done reading her book. It's called Welcome to the Family, Angela Pisano. And I'm not just saying this, though, because you're on, Angela. I love, though, and this is what I want to talk about, is not just like, the mob stuff, like what did your father do? And yeah, we'll get into that and all that, but the psychology of like, growing up in that life and around that life. And, but before we get into that, why don't you just start out by letting us know where you're from, and then we'll just go from there.
Sure, and thanks for having me on today. I'm from Caldwell. I grew up in Rutherford, New Jersey. And I was a child there in the 60s and 70s, moved out in 85 when I married. And my parents were originally from the North Ward of Newark, where many Italians were from. And they actually moved out, I believe, in 58. My father was not the typical clannish Italian, and neither was my mom. So they wanted to get away from that Newark mentality, but not too far away because they wanted to visit it all the time. They just didn't want to be submerged in it. So they chose Rutherford, a nice waspy town in 1958.
What blew me away by reading your book is the way how you're actually here. And I'm saying that in human form. Meaning,
I'm here?
Like born into this world by
and why do you say that?
By chance, by your father walking out when he was about to get married.
Oh, yes. So that's an interesting story. Yes, my father, he was already established in the rackets, and he was about 26, 27 years old, I think. And he was in Newark coming out of a gentleman or men's club where they had espresso, played cards, a social club in the North Ward. And my mom and her sister, my Aunt Vi, were walking down Bloomfield Avenue, which was like Main Street, USA then, in the 40s. And I'm going to say that again, the 1940s. So what everything goes today, but it was the 1940s. So they were walking down in the block, and my father came out of the social club, and he just literally, they intersected. And he looked at my mom and my sister, and he said to my mom, started a conversation, and he said, I'm getting married this Saturday, but I'd like to see you again. And can I have your number? So my aunt was the more conservative of the two. And she said, she was like looking, and when she tells the story, she was like looking at my mom, and he said, yeah, I'm getting married and my honeymoon's in Virginia Beach for 2 weeks. And there were party lines then. But my mom gave him her number, and he couldn't wait till he got back from his honeymoon, because he said to her, when I get back from my honeymoon, I'll call you.
Didn't he contact her on the honeymoon?
Yes, that's what he couldn't wait. So he called her from the honeymoon, and they embarked on a 14-year affair when he got back, which neither one regretted or apologized for. And it was the 1940s. So that was risque for then. And my mother, she was a very interesting woman psychologically. She was extremely complicit with my dad, but she was extremely rebellious, and they were both very forward thinking. So I think when they met on Bloomfield Avenue, it was kind of like the universe kind of aligned everything, because it was a very very incidental, very, you're just walking, out of a club. And she was quite beautiful. Um, but she gave him her number. And as I recall, guys that I knew years later, they were in their 80s and 90s, and they said to me, your mother didn't give anybody her number unless they were handsome, had a little money. She was a little conceited, a little snooty. And I thought, well, she had a right to be, I guess, And they embarked on a 14-year affair. And he stayed married for 14 years to his first wife, Anna Curcio. And he carried on with my mom, who was living at home on Fifth Street with my grandfather. And you could imagine what went on for 14 years with family and the Italians and my mom and dad and his wife. And, and this went on into the 50s until they married on February 11th, 1958. And my mom, when she met my dad, was just turning 18.
I mean, he had to go through a lot, though, like, with
his wife, Anna. Yes.
Anna,
yes. She was his childhood sweetheart, and high school sweetheart, lived in the neighborhood girl, was friends with all my aunts, his sisters. And you didn't get divorced then like you do now, right? The church and legality and things were different. New Jersey was not a no-fault divorce state then. And he went through a lot, and he was never going to stop seeing my mom, though. And either she had to accept that, Anna, or she didn't. And I did meet her. I think it was just a stroke of bad luck for her. But she did put the nail in the coffin. And my father finally did get his divorce from her and married my mom.
And you don't have to talk about this at all, though. But I mean, who he was with, though, she was having like self-induced abortions.
Well, so that's, yes. So my father, loved children, always did, and animals. And he was with my mother, and Anna was getting frustrated, as you can imagine, and angry and bitter. And there was arguments, and he was going to my Aunt Jenny's, and he was getting thrown out and going back home. And I don't know how he found out, but back in the day, many women did at-home abortions simply because they were exhausted, they were tired, and they didn't tell their husbands. They just said they had a female malady, but it was common. And she did an abortion, an at-home abortion. He found out, and he had said to me when I was about 15, when he told me, he said, she did it to spite me. And who takes a child's life to do that, to spite me? So I don't know if they would have stayed married if she never did that, and he would have just continued having an affair with my mom. I don't know, but she put the nail in the coffin. And I'm pro-choice, and he knew that. My father knew I was pro-choice back in the day, but that's what happened. And he got his divorce, and he married my mom.
Now let's let everyone know, who was your father? Who is your father?
My father, so his real name, his birth name is Lorenzo Martino, and he was known as Golden Boy, Red, and Larry Martin throughout his lifetime, along with Larry. And he was a kid that was born here. Both my parents were. My grandparents were the ones that journeyed over from Provincia di Avellino, which is where a lot of the Italian racket people came from, southwestern mountain towns of Italy. And so they came here, my grandparents, from Toyota, and they set up shop with sponsorship in the North Ward of Newark, Coldwater Flat. And he was a poor kid. And my grandmother, Angelina, passed at, I believe, 33. And there were 7 children, the oldest being 18, and my Aunt Anna being I guess, a baby under 1. And my father was probably somewhere around 15 or 16. And he wanted money. And he saw that he was defiant. I'm a teacher. So if he was in schools today, parents would be told he had conduct disorder or defiant disorder. And he wanted money and there was no money. So he would go downtown with his shine box at 8, 9 years old, and he would come home and still get a beating with the belt from my grandfather, even though he made money because, he went downtown at 8, 9 years old, and he would just get up and leave school. And fast forward till teenage years, boxing was very, very big then. Yeah. And the Empire Theater was in Newark. And that's where they had vaudeville acts. Jackie Gleason still owes him money, actually.
I was going to bring that up.
His soul.
I was going to bring that up, yeah.
Yeah, so he was in this vaudeville, and my father shared a dressing room with Gypsy Rose Lee and Southern. These were all famous burlesque strippers of the day. But he went down one day to the gym at like 15, and he went in, and he was a tough kid from what I was told, and he lied about his age, and he started boxing, and he graduated from Golden Gloves to professional. And professional, he was making $50 a fight in 1931. So that was a lot of money. And he dropped out of school, and he used it as a gateway into the rackets. And as my father said many times at our dining room table in Rutherford, was I going to keep getting my head knocked in? Boxing, he said, what was I going to do? And he wanted money. He was not going to go to Dugan's and pick strawberries. He was not going to do any of those things. And he was a defiant kid. His mother died. He was angry. He was mad. He was an incorrigible. And at that time, he respected these men. He saw money. He saw nice suits. He saw cars, And he also enjoyed the boxers. He loved Max Baer. He said he used to come into the gym with a fur coat and tan, and so he wanted more. It really
he got a little starstruck when he saw Max.
Yeah, he just wanted more. He wanted his brothers and sisters to have more, So he went the illegal route, and he was smart. He dropped out of high school, I think, sophomore or junior year of high school. But he was a smart kid, and he was good at math. Now, with all that being said, you don't start out in that business like any even legal business. You don't start out as the CEO, right? So, he started out low man on the totem pole, and he met people. And he worked for a circus. He was a bodyguard for an owner of the Clyde Beatty Circus. And he bounced around, but illegally or in jobs that were not the run of the mill for the child of immigrants in 1930s.
Now, do you think he got into boxing because he really thought that he was going to be like pro, or do you think he used that for a way to get into the rackets?
I have to think about that from the conversations. I think my father, he enjoyed the good life. He enjoyed beautiful women. He enjoyed money. He was not flashy. If he said 5 words to you in a conversation, you were, lucky that he said those 5 words. But what he said was profound. So no, I don't think he got into boxing because he wanted to be pro. I think he got into it because he wanted money. And that was a quick way to make money. He was tough and they liked him. And from what I understood, he was very handsome. So here was this young kid, but he was put in with the top headliners, dressing room, Gypsy Rose Lee. And I think she must have been a year or 2 older than him. And so I think he just enjoyed that whole lifestyle, women, late nights, money, being around movers and shakers, so to speak, and he found his niche, so to speak.
Yeah, and we'll get into it. He dealt with guys like Matty the Horse. That's a very
Yes.
prominent name out there for the Genovese. And he also, though, he did stuff, though, for other families, too, right? It wasn't just one single family.
Yeah, what happened was he started in the 1930s. And of course, my dad was not one to speak of his business. But from what I gathered from my mom, the war broke out in 39, right? World War II. So in my house growing up, I would hear my mother say, "Oh, I wish I had those black seam stockings from the war from Sam Ricardo," or I wish I had whatever from, Moretti. And I was like, these are people I kind of know. Like, I know their names from newspapers and things, and, from TV. And my father didn't speak of it as much as my mom, but I would ask. And my father was, he did some work with Willie Moretti, and that's how he got to Frank Sinatra's house and Nancy's in Hasbrook Heights. I don't know who he worked with, but there was ration stamps during World War II. And you had to have ration stamps to get flour, sugar, milk, eggs, other things, because everybody went off to war, and nobody was here. And so my father was working with people, I don't know who, where he would have to fly to Chicago, but they counterfeited these ration stamps. And those ration stamps were like money. So my mom couldn't help him because there was no cell phones or any of that. And he got on an airplane to go to Chicago. And during the war, there was no money, the Depression, but he was making a lot of it. He was a millionaire, maybe 4 or 5 times over, but did not die a millionaire. And he was making a lot of money, becoming slowly a millionaire. But the FBI were waiting for him when him and his other partners got off the plane. And that was the one and only time he went to prison.
Now I wanted to bring it back, though, because he gave a good overview of who he was, what he was doing. You're 5 years old the first time the feds come to your door, correct?
That I remember, yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And all that. There's good ones, there's bad ones or whatever. But like when they just storm in the house like that with little children, they don't think of the effect, though, that it could just have, though, on the kids. They kind of.
No, I don't think that I think that they're doing their job, And yes, so I told those few stories to give you an idea of who he was. He was tough as nails, confident, had a lot of swagger to be that young, right? Counterfeiting, boxing, meeting people that were A-list names, right? Yeah. During I think he lived in a penthouse in the city next door to Rosalind Russell and Cugat, with his friend Scribby. So he was obviously a confident guy. And he wasn't afraid. He was tough. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't afraid of pain. He wasn't afraid of anyone, even he wasn't a big guy. My father was only about 5'8", but he could be menacing. So yes, I was 5, and like any child, well, some children remember everything, some remember nothing, but most of us have some kind of memory from when we're very young. So it was a school day. My mom was getting ready, and my dad was working in New York. There was usually a 3:30 afternoon game, and then he was working at night as well. So he was sleeping, and the door, our side back door, was pushed in. FBI came in, guns drawn, their badges shown. My mom was not one to play nice. She was not one to be disrespectful, but she didn't say have a seat. She didn't ask for if you want coffee, none of that. So she was half dressed. I was half dressed. My father was sitting on the end of the bed. They made their way to the back bedroom. And my father said, could you have my wife put on her house coat? She was putting on her stockings. She had on a slip and a bra. And she put my jumper on. I was crying by this point. Our Manchester Terrier, Cindy, was going crazy. There was 3 of them. 2 were already pulling the house apart, and one had the warrant and speaking to my father. So my mom took me to the kitchen, and my mother, and there was one sitting at our kitchen table. So my mom had presence of mind. My father had a little black book, and it was black and it was little, but it was not filled with girls' numbers. It was filled with all contacts. Dick DiCarlo, Jerry Katina, Richie Biardo, Johnny Coca-Cola, that was Johnny Lardiere, all the gentlemen that he was working with at the time, and various other soldiers, capos, and contacts. So my mother, he kept it right on the counter by our sugar bowl and creamer. She went over to pour herself a cup of coffee, but she put this little black book in her girdle. Nice. And they were very upset. They didn't find anything except a lot of cash, which today would be even more than the 3,000 or 5,000 that they found in 67, in a cookie jar. They were not crooked. They left it. But they did ask my father, you have to come down to the Newark Federal Building. He said, okay. He said, let me take a shower and get dressed. My father went nowhere without his suit and tie on. Everything was just so. He was meticulous. They left, and he said he'll see me later, and going with his friends. And I knew something was wrong going to school, and I loved going to school. It was normalcy. I loved my teacher. And I asked my mother, and she said, I think they just had the wrong house, and then my father had said friends. And even at 5, well, wait a minute, friends don't bust into a house, right? So that was my introduction. And then I had encounters with the FBI, never local police, but the FBI, probably till about 18.
I mean, even when you were a minor, weren't they though? Like when you were going to school, when you see them out?
Yes, I was a minor. So we lived in Rutherford, and I was at Rutherford High School. I was a junior, and I got out of my car. I drove to school, or maybe I was a senior. I think I didn't get my license till October of senior year because I graduated young. So, so I was a senior. So I remember getting out of my car, and I remember them sitting in front of our house since I was a little kid, in those drab maroon sedans, and they look like insurance guys, but damn well they're not. So I shut the door. My pocketbook was swinging, holding my books, and I see these 2 guys, sitting, but I ignored them. I was schooled from a little child. So, but one of them actually said to me, good morning, Angela. And I just didn't even look at them or anything. So my girlfriends went inside. That night at dinner, I told my parents, and my father said, I got to call Jerry. Jerry Canningeiser was his main attorney. He used to use
he had him on retainer, right? Yeah.
He had Sidney Swirsky on retainer and Jerry Canningeiser, and then he stuck with Jerry, who was a real estate attorney. And he said, I got a call. He said, they can't be approaching her.
So when I don't want to give too much away on the book though, but when I read that though, it's kind of smart though. Instead of getting like the criminal defense attorney, go with the real estate though type attorney, because
yes,
it's a good way to throw him off. Like, well, he doesn't, if he thinks he's guilty, he's gonna hire a criminal attorney. But
yes,
so he seems very shrewd.
My father was very clever, very shrewd, intelligent. He didn't play chess, but he played a good chess game, and he knew human nature. And I think what he had on his side was he was intelligent. Even though he dropped out of high school, he was a voracious reader. So he read all the time. Plus, he used to go to antique dealers, and they just didn't socialize with racket people. He sent my mom to Catherine Gibbs, which would be like an elite college today. It was a business school. So she was flying around the country with a president of her company in the 1940s. And they went on through the years to socialize with legal people who were intelligent and had nice jobs and a nice, social culture. So he was very shrewd. And when he had Sidney Swirsky, who I remember well, um, he was an excellent attorney, but my father was indicted. I believe it's when I got sick a lot with my stomach. I guess he got indicted around 67. I can't be sure. Um, and they keep pushing a case back until they don't anymore. And it was a huge gambling case with major names like Jip DiCarlo, Ray. He also went by Ray DiCarlo, who was a capo. There was Jerry Katina. There were other people in that court case. And that would have been, I believe, one of the first court cases where RICO was, that would be one of the first tried under RICO. It was all over the papers and everything. So my father, I remember, used Jerry, who sold them. I think it was their attorney they used when they bought their house in Rutherford. And then I remember going to his home a lot. I believe it was Milburn or Short Hills. The family is still in that area, and I believe they still own that home. And I remember my parents talking about the case a lot, especially when he got indicted, and it didn't look good. The grand jury brought the indictment, and I remember my father saying, with these names and with what's going on, he said, I have to use someone like, I'm going to sit there like I'm an idiot. I don't know what's going on. I just hired the guy that we use for our house, or a real estate attorney. And Jerry, I recall, he was enthused. He was so happy to be on a criminal court case. So he was shrewd in a lot of different ways. Yes.
Is there a lot of other classmates though who have fathers who are bakers in the middle of the night?
Yeah, I never questioned that. So my parents, they never hid anything from me. They told me what I was able to understand for that age. So my father and mother actually told me at 7 years old that my father worked with a lot of nice gentlemen and he was not a baker. I never questioned at 7 my father was going out in a beautiful suit, at 10:30 at night to bake bread. And my mother always, she was the one, she always would back up my father. Make sure you don't know the name of the bakery. So 7 years old, you are in first grade and or beginning of second. And I'm a teacher, like I said. So these are little bodies. So I was asked to hold on to quite an adult secret, I believe, at a very, very young age. And I, as an adult, realized that was the day that I was expected to toe the line, to understand we live an inside life, but we live an outside life as well. We just fly under the radar. And there are certain lies, they did not use that word, but there are certain lies we have to tell. And that's just the way it is. Because even though it wasn't told to me, young children do synthesize at some age. And usually, I don't know, maybe they start synthesizing, which is above comprehension, maybe 10, 11 years old. But before that, you start comprehending things. And I knew that this wasn't because as a kid, your parents, when they're serious, they're telling you this because it's serious. It matters. So on some level, I'm sure deep in my conscience, I knew I had to do this because this protected my father. In turn, it protected us as a family.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So I think that's when the psychology of living like this started. And, we lived in a very waspy town. At that point, Rutherford was still very waspy. If you had a last name with a vowel, it was a little odd. And RFK was very active in the 60s, and he had a war on the rackets, the mafia. So I didn't know who those men were when I walked the dog with my mom at 10 o'clock at night across the street in front of our neighbors, the Steffens house. I didn't question any of that. But then as I got older and I heard my parents speaking, then I realized. And then I realized as I got older and I walked my dogs, out and I saw these gentlemen, and I never looked at them, never acknowledged them. And I had to go to school, write essays, discuss. I taught this. I know when you come back to school, you journal, you discuss what maybe your family vacations were. I left out that we were at the paddock with little Pussy, down in Long Branch. I just said we're at the beach in Long Branch with a bunch of families, but you learn to. You learn as a child very quickly to absorb your surroundings, and whatever you're living is normal.
Yeah.
And I was not abused. I was not neglected. I was a little princess. So honestly, I had a very happy childhood.
And you're the only, I forgot to mention, you're the only child.
I'm the only child. Yes. And well, my mother had said to me when I was in my early 20s, she said, you don't think Daddy ever thought he was going to have kids, and he was 46 or 47 when he had me, not with his lifestyle, So children absorb, and children, this is their normal. So as I grew during the week, I was in Rutherford playing tennis, and doing Rutherfordian type, upper middle class suburb things. And Friday and Saturday night, though, when I was old, you dress different. Two very different worlds.
Were you more living in the present? Like, how the FBI came at 5 years old, they sit you down at 7 years old, your family, they explain how the life, what your father does and all that. Were you worried, like ever worried that, he's going to be going away, or feeling any pressure like that? Or were you just more living in the present? Like
when I was a little kid, I wasn't worried. But when my father,
or when he got a little older.
Yeah, when my father got indicted, I was probably in fourth grade, or probably fourth grade, third or fourth grade. And I remember seeing the indictment papers, and I remember my parents discussing it, but they didn't talk directly to me about it. But I remember my father saying to my mom, this could be grave. I could go away for this. And that's when he hired Jerry, and we were at Jerry's house every night. I don't know what they were discussing, but whatever they were discussing, I was looking at the New York skyline. I was having candy, whatever I was doing. I don't know what they were actually discussing, but it was a lot of discussions going on. And so you so to speak, if you walk in a house, right, Eric, if there's good energy, if you feel tension. Yeah. So the energy had changed a little bit. Things got a little bit more serious. And I absorbed that. And my stomach started hurting a lot. And my mom would give me Coke syrup. And then when my father was acquitted, things were good. But before that trial too, my father wasn't always home, so you have to imagine they're gambling, right? They're at a craps game, right? And we're not talking a crap game up against a curb, right? This is a crap game with, strippers and buffets of food and top-notch liquor, and it's a nice floating,
probably, not just throwing $20 on the ground on the curb.
No, and these are exactly. Yeah, there was a lot. I mean, you're talking people that were betting in the 60s, 5,000, 5,000. This is a lot of money now. Never mind then, right? Yeah. So And my father was a manager of these. And when he first started, he was a driver, which when there was an informant, which you could still find his FBI files and you'll see, there was an informant who mentioned Larry Martin was a driver, Johnny Dodge. He was in there at the barn with Jip DiCarlo, that kind of thing. But so I don't know how they came up with this, but when I was little, my mother said to me, Daddy's not home, and she had to be at work. She'd get me ready for school, and the phone would ring, and it was just us. And my mother would say, well, whoever called, she would say that Daddy's at the Chinese restaurant. Now, I knew the Chinese restaurant he was at the police station because he got arrested. And he could visit the Chinese restaurant under RFK 2-3 times a week. Or if the politicians wanted a bonus, or if they wanted more money, or if the heat was on, or, many times these were setups. So I knew that. And I felt good about that because I knew he was safe. I knew he'd be home by the time I got home from school. And it was harassment. But when that case happened, that was not harassment. That was an indictment, grand jury. My father was not one. He could hold on to a lot of tension, pressure, take a lot of it. The only little thing I would notice is when he was under extreme pressure, he would twirl a napkin into a point almost, or his temple, And so that was really the only time that I really had a lot of angst and drank a lot of Coke syrup. And I visited the doctor a lot from, I don't know, probably even first grade. So I lived with worry as a kid, and I lived with pressure, I guess.
Now, were you treated differently in your schools or anything like that, compared to other kids?
I don't think so, but I do know as an adult. And it's funny, as mature as I was because of the situation I was in, I never thought about this even in high school. I don't know why, but I just did it. But then I realized as an adult, my father was in the Star Ledger. I mean, we got neighbors sent, criminal on the article. So when I was a little kid, this news case was all over the place, and he was all over the newspapers. And like I said, I'm a teacher too, and I had a kid in 5th grade tell me his father was a bookmaker. I said, "Oh, he's a bookmaker, Sean?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "He makes books, at night at Barnes and Nobles." I said, "Oh, that's great." So, you have a responsibility as a teacher. So, and I had excellent teachers. But then I realized as an adult, they all knew, and I was not treated differently, I don't think. And then in high school, I'm sure my guidance counselor, teachers, I'm sure they knew, but I was not treated differently. I don't know if any of them ever saw, though, like the FBI sitting outside Rutherford High School. No one ever.
What are they trying to get from you? What are they trying to get from you?
At 17, God only knows.
Yeah.
I have no clue. None. And they never should have done that. Maybe it was intimidation that, they're
pressure.
They're by we're going to follow your daughter. But what did I know?
Well, in the book, it does say you were a minor at the time, though, too.
I was a minor. Yeah. 17 is a minor.
That's crazy. But I love, though, how you're like, you were very confident growing up.
I guess I was, but what choice did I have? So, let's talk about that a little bit when you said the psychology of a child in this. Yeah. I look at this extremely different than a woman who chooses to go out with a racket guy, somebody in the mafia. I look at this very differently than someone whose stepfather, right, is a racket guy, maybe. I was born into it. I did not live in a racket household. Again, my parents had legal friends, nice social culture. My father was from the old school. You don't mix business with pleasure. Racket guys never came to our home. I don't remember. other than going with my father to Jip's house in Mountainside. White envelopes were always all over the place. You know, one thing about The Sopranos, you know, they did get that right. You know, white envelopes, right? So I remember Jip DeCarlo, you know, and I remember a lot of racket guys. But to me, my father went to work. Like he would say, well, he would have his espresso with his Sfogliatelle, 9:30, 10 o'clock, and then he'd go to work. That's what he did. He went to work.
How could you look at it any different? Because I'm thinking you're just born like into it. It's just normal though to you.
It's normal. I met a lot of people accidentally. And I also look at it differently because my father, I'm going to say this flat out. My father, I'm sure, had to be rough and tough at certain times. He was no one to screw with. He could be menacing. He could be mean. You didn't fool around with him to the point when I started dating, I knew what to tell him and I knew what not to tell him because you didn't want to have anybody put in a position. The boy.
Yeah.
My mother was almost attempted rape. The guy did two things wrong when you know, this was way before I was born. This was in the 40s when she was still living home with my grandfather, or early 50s. I think it was the 40s, you know, and the guy did two things wrong. You didn't go into an Italian neighborhood if you were black. It's just the way it was. If you were German, you didn't go into an Italian neighborhood or an Irish neighborhood. You pretty much stayed on your own turf. Yeah. Well, he not only came into an Italian neighborhood, he happened to attempt rape a racketeer's girlfriend. So, I don't know. He was found dead in a curb with ice picks in his eyes. Ice picks are Sicilian. That's who uses ice picks to kill, Sicilians. And I have no idea what happened. And at some point you learn at a young age when you're born into this, you don't ask, you don't tell, because honestly, it's not part of my life. My life was very separate from my father's life. So I don't know much about him, but my father didn't condone it. Many years later, he said to me, I respected these guys when they were younger. He said, but then, you know, you age and you realize there's nothing to respect here. What are you respecting? And thank God my father was intelligent. He was able to at some point then use his brain, because I think at the very least, people have to know two things about the Mafia. It's a military organization and it's tribal. That's it. And if you understand its military organization and it's tribal, then you start to understand the psychology of it. So I think my father was, I don't want to say lucky. I guess he was in a good place that he was intelligent. They're not going to use him for a killer. And they're not going to use a killer to manage a ton of money. You know what I mean? And be a manager.
He's more a racketeer than the gangster. Like, you know.
Oh, absolutely. But if you provoked them.
Which they need, though. I mean, racketeers, yeah, you need gangsters to go out and do, like, you know, to get, you know, to send messages, do what they do. But I mean, well,
let's be clear.
It's about money. It's about money. You need racketeers.
Let's be clear. The third thing is smart racket guys and families. It's about making money, a lot of money, tax free. So that's what I meant when I said it's military. It's tribal. Yeah. In the military, you need the gunners on the airplanes in Vietnam. Their lifespan was 2 minutes. You know, it's just the way it is. Then you need generals and you need the people in between. So I'm not saying he wasn't rough and tough and didn't do things that he probably wasn't proud of, but he was a businessman and he was smart. And if I learned two words that are ingrained in my head, even to today, you have to earn and you got to produce. That's it. My father used to say all the time, you got to produce, you got to earn. And that's what he did. He produced and he earned. He was a big money maker for the mob.
Yeah.
And he got and he jumped around to the different families. He tended to work with the Genovese crew mostly because they were smart and they weren't about wars.
Ivy League of the mob, the Genovese, at times you wouldn't even know who the boss was and stuff like that.
They had front bosses and street bosses, and like Matty Iannello. He was a capo, but there was Lefty Ruggiero with the Bonanno crew, Mike Sabella. Mike got demoted. They put Sonny Napolitano, Sonny Black in, and after Carmine Galante got killed, there was two factions, and by then I was a teenager, so I understood and I knew who these people were. But again, I didn't say, oh, we just saw Maddie of the Genovese crew, or I saw, Lefty, with the Bonanno crew, or, I didn't say those things because these were just men I knew, and I felt very safe amongst them. And then in New Jersey, there was Jimmy Calabrese, who worked for the Biardo crew, Jamo, and I felt safe with him at the Vesuvius and all of these gentlemen. And they knew who I was. And because my father was very well respected, I was told many times he went as far as he went because he knew when to be quiet. He knew when to, not be quiet. And I guess if you had to label him, he was a soldier, but the rules of management of today didn't apply then. So that's why I think maybe there was a sit down and he was able to jump around. But I remember I was like 15 or 16. We're sitting on our front step in Rutherford, and I said to him, well, how come you don't go any further? And he's like, why should I? He's like, I make enough money this way. And he says, and once you reach capo, you get your head shot off right away. He said, I don't need to.
More heat on you, too.
What's that?
And he'll have more heat on him as well.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. Of course. So I think he knew what he was doing at that point. And, and then Donnie Brasco came into things. But the psychology of children born into this, I think it depends on how your parents are. I think it depends on who they are and how they raise you. And I think it depends on their value system and their standards. I just happened to get lucky that both my parents were big into education. They had nice social circles. My father didn't think this was the end all life. He always said he never would have went into it if he didn't have to. Now, you could debate that, right? Because he didn't have to, did he? He could have worked in a factory at GM. He could have worked at Dugan's picking strawberries. So you could debate
I think his upbringing, though, maybe I could be wrong, was looking around and he was like, I want more in life.
That was the bottom line. Yeah, he wanted more. And that was it. But yeah, so I look at things a lot. I look at women, like, I don't know if it's still popular, but like women want to dress like mob wives. It's called mob attire for women. Are these women crazy? First of all, mob wives today maybe dress like that, or maybe the ones that are very showy, or the ones that want you to know who they are. But the most successful racket people are the ones you never heard of.
Yes.
End of story.
100%. 100%. I mean, we have a guy around here that nobody heard of until a certain movie came out, and he was extremely powerful, and Russell Buffalino, but very low key. And but like, yeah, I love though how you say though, like the army aspect of it. I never heard it like that though, but it's the truth. There's a part 2 in your book that I do want to bring up though. I love like your opinions on stuff. Like, do you have sympathy? What do you think of the pornography? What do you think of this or that? And you just have like the answer, like, well, listen, if these ladies are over 18 years old, or if this person chooses though this life, they know what they're getting involved in. So,
you mean when my father was dealing with the sex trade with Maddie? Maddie owned all the sex clubs.
Yeah.
In Times Square at the time. Plus, I always forget the name. I don't know why, but the famous gay club, which now is iconic, historic. He owned that too, which really, the 82 club, he, and it was, it was a different era, right? Triple X, you know, you had to go, you had to get the 8 tracks or the 8 things for your projector. And because I grew up with very specific ideologies and I formed my own, obviously. My parents never believed in indoctrination. They always said to me, question everything, question school, question what you see, question what you hear, question us, even us. So I went to the 82 Club as a little kid. I don't know what the big deal is with transgender or drag queens today. I don't think it's necessary to have drag queens go in and tell stories in schools. But if a school lives in a liberal area and that's what they want to do, get to know the drag queen. You probably have something in common with them, you know. And I was raised, I don't know if the word is correct as liberal, but I was raised in a lot of different situations. So yeah, so I think if a woman is 18 and over, maybe she wants to be in pornography. If she doesn't, then she needs to figure out a way to get out of it. You know, prostitution is legal in Vegas, right? I don't know if it's legal anywhere else, but it is legal there.
Atlantic City too.
Yeah, and I believe that we do have, you know, I think we are people of our decisions, not our circumstances, right? So, and if you ask me today, my husband and I go back and forth on this. My husband's like, well, you know, there are people who have been murdered, you know, and stuff. And I said, yeah, that's business though. That's what you sign up for. That's why it's military and that's why it's tribal. You know, once you sign up for something, right, you have to know the consequences and the rewards. So it's business. Do I feel sympathy? Actually, no. It's business.
I love that.
I'm not saying I'm right.
No. I agree though with you. I love that part.
It's
like you were just straight up, but it makes so much sense though, especially down to the point of like, you know, oh yeah, these guys are killers, this and that though, but like they know though what they're signing though up for. Like they're like, you know, like you know what you're signing up for. Then like when you were talking about pornography, you were saying though about like, you know, if the women are 18 years old, I mean, yes, of course, a lot of them might come from broken homes, this or that, but I mean, if they're of age, I mean, it's their choice. I mean,
it's their choice. And it's, you know, my father always had a saying, it's all how you want to go. And my girlfriends and I, you know, we were all pretty attractive and nice cars, living in the suburbs. We had a built-in pool, and we were all sitting out by the pool one day at my house. And my father, you know, he wasn't working the 3:30 Staten Island game anymore, only at night. So he came out and sat outside with us many times. And one of my girlfriends was saying, yeah, when I get older, I want to meet a Wall Street guy. So my father said, well, you know what you got to do? You got to go where the Wall Street guys hang. It's all how you want to go. You want to meet poets, you go down to the, you know, they call it's Tribeca now, or Soho, or NOLA, but you go down to the Village, you know. You want to meet ragged guys, go where the wise guys hang, you know. It's all how you want to go in life. It's all, do you want a good life? Do you want a life with obstacles? He was all about, you got to make good, sound decisions. And it's all how you want to go, because you have a lot of choices before you. And sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes there's no money. Sometimes you come across someone who got addicted to drugs or alcohol, whether it be through depression, whether it be through a doctor's giving you, you know, opioids or something for surgery, or maybe you just like it. But there's still opportunity at some point to say, I don't want to do this anymore. It's a matter of strength. And that was the second thing my father used to say to me when I was like from 12 on. He used to say, there's going to be days darker than midnight, but you got to get up. You got to put one foot in front of the other, and you got to get up and do the day. You just can't lie down. So I was like always like raised with this kind of fortitude. And my mother was very strong. As complicit as she was with my father's life, she was very rebellious, very strong, very stubborn. She was very, my father used to say, I'm the racket guy. The real racket guy is your mother. She's the real racket guy. She was very beautiful, very feminine. She was very, She knew how to handle herself, but she was a tough cookie underneath all that, you know?
She could be
Um,
independent, like she could be independent.
oh, she was totally independent.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then, my father got out of this in 83 because he didn't like who was coming up, but he just couldn't retire.
Right.
He had to start the process, in 76, 77. Donnie Brasco, the movie. He didn't like this guy. He used to say to all the time, there's a guy hanging around. And I met I can't even think of his name right now. What was his name? Johnny Brasco's real name.
Joe Pistone.
Joe Pistone. And my father used to say, no racket guy has a mustache. Who are they kidding? He's got a mustache and he's always looking. He's too observant. My father knew human nature. And sure enough, it turned out the way it was. And I guess
6 years later, 6
yeah,
years.
yeah, he started. And I remember Lefty very well. And Al Pacino, I don't think portrayed him well at all. It's not how he really was. I remember I don't think Sonny Black, but I used to like Mike Sabella a lot. I used to like Matty Iannello, Matty the horse, a lot during those years. But then my father said, I don't like who's coming up. He didn't like what was happening with John Gotti in New York. And my father reported to New York. He was working more in New York than Jersey. So he reported a lot to New York. So he had a very interesting life. And for me growing up in it, the thing that I say is this, and just like that, the life disappeared. I was schooled never to go out with a racket guy's son. And there were racket guy sons who were interested in me. And my father used to say, absolutely not. You don't want this life. You want a degree. You want to get educated. You want peace. You don't want to have to say your husband's a baker, So, and just like that, it disappeared. And was it a transition for me? It was. I did miss. Absolutely. I'd be lying to you if I said I did miss, my father bringing home a bunch of swag and me saying, oh, I think I'll have this and I think I'll have that, and going places and front row tables and things like that. But at what cost? At what cost?
Yeah. I mean, you were no go play. I mean, there was I believe I read a story, like you tripped over Andy Warhol. I mean, you definitely met a lot of, very well-known names out there.
Yeah, well, our neighbors, Bill and Irene. Bill was a vice president for Paramount, and The Godfather came out. So
The Godfather came out. Oh, you're right, because that's when Joe Colombo with the league when he got shot.
So, yes, and I was there that day.
Yeah.
I was actually at that rally when he got shot. So.
Yeah.
So our neighbor said, Angela, you can't go to the premiere. You're too young, So I said, okay. So, but I remember the car coming from Paramount, my parents going. It was at the Paramount Theater in the city. I remember my parents saying how they sat with Liz Taylor and Richard Burton and other people and so forth and so on, and what have you. And then the Bad News Bears came out in 76 with Walter Matthau, Tatum O'Neal. And I went to that one with my parents. Yeah. And that's where Andy Warhol, I tripped him on an escalator. I was always in stilettos. And he said to me, oh, don't we have like a fine, classy young thing here or something? Do you want to join in our party? My father was so quick by my side telling Andy Warhol she's staying with her parents tonight. I never got a word in edgewise, but he was quite unique looking, Eric. He was crazy looking with his
Warhol?
albino. Yeah. I couldn't stop staring.
Yeah. Yeah. And
you're not Jack Dempsey.
Not staring in a sexual manner. Staring is just like a unique manner, right?
Oh, he was just so odd looking. Yeah. And I knew who he was, and I was attractive young girl, and I met Jack Dempsey when I was 5. I used to go eat at his restaurant all the time. So yes, I met Hugh Hefner, not through my father, but through a boyfriend at the time. He was doing some things, with the Playboy Club in Vernon Valley. And so met Hugh Hefner He wasn't there often, but he was there and he happened to be there. And so I did meet people throughout my lifetime just because of the business, and some ball players. Some ball players were huge gamblers.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. That's why, like in this book right here, and it's called Welcome to the Family, My Life as a Mob Daughter, Angela Pisano. Yeah, no, I was just blown away. I was, from just all the names, all the, there was one thing in there that I wanted to ask you. Yeah, tell me the story now. Jackie Gleason was supposed to, didn't he screw your father over?
Well,
Something about a suit. Something about a suit.
Jackie Gleason was, he was one of the leads in the vaudeville, in the Empire Theater. And he said and he used to get apples thrown at him and tomatoes and all kinds of things, my father said. And he said to my father, I have a big interview. He said, I don't have any money for a suit. I'm broke. My father made more money boxing the main bout than Jackie Gleason. So my father said, I'll bring you to my tailor. Better yet, I'll give you the money. Go get your suit. Go this, go that. Never saw Jackie Gleason again. He never came back. Never gave my father the money back. Nothing. He just, disappeared, went off into the limelight, and became famous. So that was the story of Jackie Gleason. And, my father said he wasn't a bad guy. He was a nice guy. He just didn't feel he had to pay my dad, I guess. And my father said I wasn't going to go looking for him. Not at that point,
Yeah. And then too high profile probably too.
Yeah.
So what made you decide that you wanted to write this book? How did that come about?
So I'm the kind of person where I think about a lot of things. And I resigned from teaching, and it was about 4 years later. My husband and I were having coffee, and I said that morning, I think I'm going to write a book. And he said, what? I said, I think I'm going to write a book about my childhood. And he said, why? I said, I've been thinking about it. I said, my father never really wanted anybody to know who he was. It was all covered very well, or as well as we thought it was. I said, but I want to write a book because I'm not a Don's daughter. I'm not a killer's daughter. Mm-hmm. I didn't choose to marry a racket guy. I'm not a daughter of a stepfather, of an uncle. I am a daughter of someone that chose this route during the 1930s, during the Depression, during World War II, went all the way through to 1983. And he went to prison once. There was indictments. There was tough times. And he knew Tommy DeVito, the Four Seasons. And, he used to hang out at Regine's sometimes, and so forth and so on. I said, but at the end of the day, I think I'm pretty normal for this kind of childhood, and I have very specific ideas about life in general. And I want to write this book, especially because I'm a teacher, and I want to write it to show people, no matter your upbringing, you don't have to be a screw up if you don't want to be. I'm not saying that people that are screw ups want to be. I'm saying that you always have a choice and an opportunity. That's it.
Absolutely.
And you I'm thinking at least everyone has one person they can call and say, I need help. Yeah. Or whatever the case may be with whatever situation. So my husband said, okay, so you're going to write this book? So I did. So I sat down, I start writing on a legal pad, and then he comes home like a week later and I said, guess what I did today? I said, I called Tommy DeVito. He said, what? Of the Four Seasons? I said, yeah, it's kind of how it works. I said, I haven't seen him in 45 years. I said, but, my father well, and that's how it works. And I had a nice conversation with Tommy, and he enlightened me on a few things before I was born. Explained how my father was thought of by the capos and above the capos, and where he was and what he did and how they were together. And there was really no one I could think of to call. Pretty much everyone has passed.
Yeah. And you know what I
Yeah.
love about your book, though? Because you didn't have a ghostwriter, right? This is you.
No, and I'm not
I
an
love it
author.
because it's not that, like, I read a lot of books and they just kind of just seem like, what the hell can I put this? This has like a street type talk to it, but intelligent. Like it's you. Like, it's not robotic like writing, if that makes any sense. Like,
I just
it's,
wrote it in my voice. The
yeah,
people that
like
know
you could
me,
tell. Yeah.
my cousins and people that know me, they're like, oh my God, like I could hear you saying this when we were 20. Yeah, I could hear you. I could hear
Yeah.
your father saying that. I could hear your mother like saying that, because my mother was we talked a lot about my dad, but she was a big influence on me as well in other areas. But I had a lot to do with, I guess, let me step back. Writing the book had a lot to do with me understanding how I got here. I thought it was very cathartic, and I thought it was putting pen to paper to me really understanding how my life was and how it went and how I'm here. And I think the thing I need to be most grateful for with my parents um, is they provided me a normalcy. They provided me an ordinary as much as our life was sometimes extraordinary. And they found or they showed me ways to just be joyous with planting daisies, or he used to take me on daisy walks. My mother, she did all the mom things, she did the hair and taking me to the dermatologist when I modeled a little bit, and she just did the mom things, right? But
Mhm.
shopping and vacation and so that's what I'm most grateful for. And I think people think that when you're in the rackets, like you're always doing stuff. No, you're not always doing stuff. It's like anybody else's home. You're having barbecues and family dinners and living life, and that's it. But yeah, my father was shrewd, never owned a thing in his life, never paid taxes,
Yeah.
made
They say
sure. Yeah, he was
that.
not going to he was not going to get caught for owning property, cars, or anything. Never even had a bank account till like he was in his 70s.
And the IRS never tried coming down on him or nothing?
For what? He never owned anything.
Oh, yeah, there you go. There you
Everything was
go.
cash. Yeah, yeah. And then we didn't talk about like the Columbus Day. I was there as a kid, and that's where my mother was my strength. So my mother was my rock. And I say it in the book. I didn't mind my father eating at the Chinese restaurant. I didn't want two parents eating there. She was my rock. She was my father's rock too. And then it was interesting that, you know, uh, the mob wanted Nixon back in the White House and Spiro Agnew. So my father wasn't going to get on the plane and go down to Miami for the convention, but we went. So that was an interesting time for me, and I was a little kid, and I remember coming home and my father saying to my mom, so did you see uh, BB Rebozo anywhere? Because he probably was in the bedroom with Nixon the whole time, that fag. And I was like, of course, my ears perked up at 11. I'm like, what? So, and I
Yeah.
liked the name. I liked BB Rebozo, very melodic. And I said, who is BB Rebozo? My father said, he's a Cuban financier. I said, okay, what's a financier? I was only in 5th grade. And I said, and I know what a fag is. I said, is Nixon gay? And my father said, yeah. So, like
Yeah.
I was just, I can't even explain it. I just think that parents, if they're who they are and they protect you and they give you the gift of ordinary, I think you're good to go, kind of.
Absolutely. And listen, I'll cut this out if you want me to, but I do want to ask this. When your mother was though raped and then they found them with ice picks and all that, do you, in your heart of hearts, do you think your father had anything to do with that or no?